Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week.
Yes, indeed.
What have you brought to the table today?
I have brought an article that was co-published in Truthout and Prism.
Yes.
It's called Here Are 5 Media-Related Actions We Can All Take Before Inauguration Day in Truthout. And then in Prism, it's called 5 Ways Movement Media Will Play a Role in Challenging Fascism. It's written by Maya Schenwar and Lara Witt, and it dives into their vision of what movement media needs to do in preparation of an incoming Trump administration, which, appears set on dismantling as much of the administrative social services available as possible and replacing them with lower quality, higher cost versions of the same services that will line the pockets of their billionaire friends.
Right.
What's up, neoliberalism, fascists?
Oh, boy.
So Maya and Lara introduced the article by saying, quote, taking action on the media front is key, and anyone reading this piece can find a lane in which to participate. Here, we offer 5 steps that media makers, readers, viewers, and listeners can take over the next couple of months to meet the moment come January. And then they share 5 actions, which are 1, educate ourselves on movement literacy, educate ourselves on media literacy, 2, build awareness of threats to journalism under fascist regimes, 3, uplift narratives and strategies for movements and vulnerable communities. 4, make room for creative, transformative ideas. And 5, build collaboratively to defend journalism and amplify radical work. So all of that is great stuff. It's all great action items to begin taking and doing as movement media prepares for the next 4 years and beyond. So lots of great stuff in this article. But where do you want to start? What stood out?
Yeah, well, all of it stood out to me. I mean, I was really excited when you first introduced this piece last week because I thought it was really intriguing and would make for an interesting conversation for us and a great way for us to sort of learn about ways that we can prepare ourselves for Inauguration Day and, as you say, beyond too. And, I think I'm especially excited to talk about this piece because it is really focused on us moving and working collectively in the fight against fascism and in this moment that we find ourselves in. And that's so critically important. And I also really appreciate the lens or the focus, if you will, in this piece around how this work can and must include all of us, right? And I think part of that was made really clear to me in the first action item, which was around educate ourselves on media literacy. But, I think a key takeaway from this piece for me is that, it's not just the media and the folks who work in the media that are dealing with this and have a critically important road ahead. All of us play an important role in what's next and what's to come. And I love what Maya and Laura say at one point to highlight exactly why this is so important. They say, quote, real human lives must be at the center of all of our reflections on the current cataclysmic moment. And I don't know, I think many, if not all of us, are really feeling that right now. And so for me, it's like our loved ones, our communities have to be at the center of our work and our fight and the work to come. And so much of this piece felt really relevant and had a lot of just tangible action for us all to take, which I just really appreciate given how confusing and scared I feel about what's to come.
Yeah, and it felt like a piece that had many different audiences, right?
Yes.
They were talking to their fellow journalists, but they're also talking to readers, listeners, watchers of media to say these are some of the things you could do. So I've liked the breadth of the article as well and appreciated that. And, I'd always putting real human lives at the center of stories, I think makes a lot of sense. It's harder to fight against somebody's story.
Someone's real lived experience. Yeah. Absolutely.
It happens, but it's harder to be like, that's not true. It's like, well, no, here's how it happened to me.
Yep.
And it's harder to challenge that. So,
absolutely.
All right. Well, in the second item, Maya and Lara are talking about the need to build awareness to the threats to journalism under fascist regimes. And I think a general understanding of how opposed to truth and fact-finding fascists are helps us understand the point of the attacks on journalism.
Right.
So they mention House Bill 9495, which could, quote, give the Treasury Secretary the ability to designate certain nonprofits terrorist supporting organizations and strip them of their tax-exempt status.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild. And it passed the House already, so now it's moving forward to the Senate. This is clearly a dangerous overreach of the executive branch. This just handed over to them by the legislative branch, which is wild.
Yeah.
And they could define the executive branch, especially under a Trump administration, but really any of the executive branches over the last however many decades, could define anything as terrorism, and thus really hold back any kind of work happening in official nonprofit organizations.
Right.
So like the ACLU could be labeled a terrorist organization, or the NAACP, or Movement for Black Lives. They could strip them of some primary funding sources because the donations would no longer be tax exempt or tax deductible.
Right.
Which means like the financial benefit for that might, I don't think it's a big piece of the calculus for lots of people who donate to these organizations, but it's a piece of something.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that's just a big thing to consider. Also to call them terrorist supporting organizations, right? What does it look like then for somebody who did donate to them?
Absolutely. And how might they feel about continuing to do so? You know?
Yeah, and what kind of charges would they face for sending money to an organization that supports terrorism?
Absolutely.
Like, so
you were telling me
wild.
about RICO charge, right? The RICO charges
in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of the so-called rule of law that allegedly protects us that would be able to be used as a weapon against us, particularly in the context of some of these things and thinking logically about what next steps of them might look like. But the article goes on to talk about how Trump has threatened to throw reporters in jail and revoke the broadcast licenses of outlets he doesn't like the coverage of, which is another blatant power grab and way to control the narrative about him and his administration. But they say that he could revoke the broadcast licenses by bringing the Federal Communications Commission under the executive control, which he has also said he would do.
Right.
So there are lots of ways to understand how Trump wants to shape the media and reporting in his favor and control the narrative over what's happening and what's truth and what's not truth and what he can get away with and et cetera.
It's textbook fascism.
Yeah.
Right. Like that right there. Open up the dictionary. What you just said is textbook fascism. And that I think speaks to what I said, how scary this is. I mean, to really think about that, to label Movement for Black Lives as a terrorist organization and to lock up journalists. I mean, I just can't imagine a world that we're living in where that's happening. So that action was a really hugely important one, I think. The third action in this piece offers us this action to uplift narrative and strategies from movements and vulnerable communities. And I want to talk about that one a little bit because I think there's important work that we can all do as it relates to this action. So Maya and Lara say this, quote, "In the face of ascendant fascism, it is even more crucial for us as journalists to uplift the narratives of marginalized communities and movements. People facing the most direct impacts are best positioned to share their stories. By uplifting these voices, other communities can learn how to build solidarity, which can in turn inform strategies on how to keep each other safe from harm." And I think what's great about that statement, that action, is, again, it involves all of us. There's work for all of us to do here. The journalists and the media need to, tell everyone's stories, to reach out far and wide, to tell real people's and real community stories and in the work that they're doing. But there's also work for us as consumers to amplify those stories and engage with them and learn from them and identify where we see ourselves in those stories and talking about all of that with our communities. The other thing that it made me think about is what we talk about here on our podcast, where we're using those stories to inform us and to continue our learning and unlearning work. And certainly our fight. And so, and the fight against fascism, especially in this context. And so I, again, just really appreciate how these call to actions are relevant for both us as consumers and the media.
Yeah. And I think it's so nice that they had different lanes for people to take and participate in. They're
Yes.
talking to everybody,
Yes.
or as many people as they can with this
Absolutely.
article of all the different ways we can take action against the fascist, push that's happening in the
Yes.
country. So the fourth item, they talk about creating or making room for creative and transformative ideas.
Right.
So Maya and Lara say, quote, unprecedented times call for unprecedented responses. As abolitionist organizer and author Mariam Kaba often says, paraphrasing Alice Walker, oppression puts a ceiling on our imagination. One of our jobs as media makers is to find ways to poke holes in that ceiling of oppression, injecting new ideas into rigid conversations, with the understanding that we'll need 1,000 new tactics to meet the onslaught to come. And that quote makes so much sense to me because as the world that media reports on changes, media has to change how they
Yes.
report on it.
Absolutely.
And one of the ways that Truthout and Prism both are doing this, along with a bunch of other media organizations, is through the Movement Media Alliance.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, it's a really cool way for movement media organizations to support one another and band together to move that work forward. No pun intended.
Yeah.
And they go on to expand on that imagination point by saying how important it is to get imaginative about the work and the stories they tell beyond the usual talking points or perspectives that media takes.
Yes.
Talking to people who have been incarcerated and what that means to them and how they survived or resisted in prison. Those kinds of stories
That's a great example.
are
Yeah.
examples of, they mention, are examples of how we could tell stories that would help people fortify themselves for what they might be facing soon.
Absolutely. And open their eyes to new stories and new experiences, right? That other human beings are experiencing. Yeah, I love this one. I think we were joking the other night about unprecedented times and that we're just, I really miss our precedented times because it just seems like we have been wading through unprecedented waters for far too long. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So, again, this speaks to this action, I think, really is largely focused on the media and pushing the media to think about how, as you say, poke holes in the ceiling of oppression and poke holes in narratives that keep us oppressed, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really great one. The last of the actions in this piece was to build collaboratively to defend journalism and amplify radical work. And I really appreciated that one. There's an important call to action there for the media to work together, to strategize together, and to support one another in this time of fascism and censorship. But again, I also appreciate the call to action on all of us. Maya and Laura offer this. They say, quote, instead of competing with other publications in a capitalism-perpetrated rut, media organizations on the left need to make a practice of sharing and amplifying each other's work. The priority should be getting accurate news, movement, strategy, and courageous ideas out to as big of an audience as possible. Readers, viewers, and listeners can fuel this collaborative fire by sharing stories and analyses via social media, email, and text, telling friends about sources, publications, podcasts, shows that they trust, hosting discussion groups where articles from various independent publications are discussed, and following the work of collaborative projects, such as our own 21 organization-wide collaboration, Media Against Apartheid and Displacement, and our forthcoming Communities Beyond Elections project. That's amazing. That is absolutely such an important call to action. And, I, again, particularly appreciate the point about us as listeners fueling that collaborative fire, as they say. And I think this article is a prime example of that. It's a co-published piece, and amplifying these actions that Laura and Maya put out there. And so, yeah, I really liked that. And it made me think about how we need to be helping our friends and family be educated consumers of media, and to think about how are we engaging with our friends and our families and our comrades and our neighbors and our communities in this work and in discussion groups and in book groups and in podcast groups. Use this podcast, folks. But really, in all seriousness, I think there's a lot of great action here that all of us can take, and it all will help, right?
Yes, and I think the alliances and things that they're putting together, I think, are really exciting.
Oh my gosh,
too.
yes.
And so all great things to do. But as we talk about action, ways people can apply this kind of thing to their day-to-day lives, we
Yes.
can move in and talk about applications.
Let's do
So
it.
how do we apply this article to our day-to-day lives? I think there's a lot of application here. You know, the whole point of this article, as we've talked about, is to invite people to take action to support movement media. They say, quote, in between all of this, make sure to breathe, eat, sleep, and pet your cat. Nobody is at their best, discernment-wise, when they're running on empty. And it makes me think of how many things are in place to make us run on empty, so we don't have time to think,
Yes.
let alone do anything about whatever it is that we thought about. You know, we've talked about debt as a tool of social control on the podcast before, and it's definitely one of the elements that I thought about when I was thinking about Maya and Lara's quote that I just shared there.
Yeah.
There's all of these things in place to keep us busy, to keep us moving along with the day-to-day and not paying attention to all of the stuff that's happening beyond what's, you know, right in front of us. And they reference how easy it is to go on autopilot in times of distress in another section of the article. And I think that's absolutely true. And we have to find ways to avoid going on autopilot in this moment as another Trump administration approaches. And in all of the moments really in general, like I think it's important right now, but it's been important for a really long time.
absolutely.
I think that we all have to be a little bit more, I don't know, awake and
Yes.
attuned to
Yes.
the things that are happening. You know, because some of the things that Trump is going to be able to take advantage of were established by like Bush and then by Obama and then by these are things that have been established in the last few decades that he's going to be able to leverage for more control and more action of stuff, whatever he wants to do.
Absolutely. I love that. We have to stay awake. We have to resist, right? We have to not only resist, I think, the status quo, but, you know, we have to resist the temptation to, you know, be in our ruts and be in our cycles and do that day-to-day stuff. But I think we also have to resist the unprecedented times we find ourselves. I mean, part of it is also the stress of just every day there's something and it can feel overwhelming. And part of that, I think, is a tactic to keep us in a place where we can't deal with it and we can't fight against it. But, you know, we have to figure out a way to do that. And I love the mention of pet your cat. Like, figure out what you need to do to take care of yourself and your loved ones. All right. And I know I've said this before, and to recharge and refuel, but also get back out there and figure out what it is that you can do. I think that's incredible application. My application comes from part of the conclusion of this piece, and it really resonated with me because it hones on why this work is important, and I think why the call to action that this piece presents to us in terms of working alongside the media in what's ahead is really critically important. And it's obviously because of the power of fascism. And I think Maya and Lara succinctly share a huge part of the antidote to that by saying this, quote, fascism thrives off of isolation, fear, disinformation, and the silencing of voices of dissent and for liberation. In media, as in all realms, our power lies in connection, particularly connection with other human beings. And I love that. It's that connection. It's solidarity. That's what we need in the face of fascism that we're experiencing and that we're living through right now. We need that connection with one another to see each other, to understand each other's struggles, to learn from each other's struggles and needs. And we certainly need that connection and that solidarity to stand up in the face, or stand up against, I should say, fascism and to fight it.
Yeah, and that the connection and solidarity, I think, to your last point there, really helps us stand up.
Yes.
With one another to fight. I think
100%.
That's crucially important.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What are we going to do to continue our learning beyond our conversation today? Speaking of fighting, my homework is to reach out to my senators again, our senators. We share senators.
Yes.
About Bill 9495 because it passed the House earlier, recently.
Yep.
And it needs to stall out in the Senate so it doesn't get signed into law, so it doesn't even make it to the president's desk. So yeah, that would be great.
I love that.
So contact your senators and put the pressure on them. Even if you think they're going to vote yes, make them know that you think that's dumb.
Absolutely.
The other thing, and dangerous in all the reasons, there's a lot of reasons that it's also dangerous. But and maybe we'll share some stuff on social media this week about it.
I love that.
The other thing is that I want to check out is a resource that Maya and Lara shared from the Kansas City Defender, which, quote, examines the past of the Black radical press. and key figures in history and how it influenced the creation of the Kansas City Defender today. So it just looked like a lot of really cool resources in history about how movement media existed in a different way and how that influences things happening now.
Yes.
And then there are a lot of articles linked in this, so I want to go back in and check some of those out, including one that I've already read, but is really great. And I just want to name check it here because I think people should read it.
Okay.
So 10 Ways to Be Prepared and Grounded Now That Trump Has Won is written by Daniel Hunter and is published in Waging Nonviolence.
Oh, great.
And it's really a great piece and is connected to different like trainings and discussions and facilitation guides that you can use to have these conversations like at work, if that makes sense for your work, or with friends or whatever.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Lots of really cool resources in that article.
Yeah. And what a great connection to what we read today. That's awesome. Yeah. And any way to help us continue to prepare ourselves for what's to come and to fight it. I love that. Very good. There were, you mentioned a couple here. There are so many incredible resources linked in this piece that I'm looking forward to checking out in some real depth, and especially in order to help me meet the call to action in this that this piece presents to us as homework. One of the ones I wanted to highlight, and I'm definitely going to look more into as my homework, is Explore Project Censored. So Maya and Laura mentioned Explore Project Censored as a tool we can use to educate ourselves on media literacy. Again, so back to that very first call to action. They say Explore Project Censored says as part of their mission that they are committed to promoting and educating the public about media literacy, independent journalism, and democracy, and fighting against censorship and fascism. And so on their website, they've got a bunch of tools and resources that look like they would be really helppful in this education. And what also really intrigued me about them was the fact that they've got a whole university component to their resources as well. So, and that's obviously work that we do. So any opportunity to be able to use those resources to engage with college students and students in general, I think about this, and, continue to educate young people about how important media literacy is. I'm all for that. So my homework is just to dig more into their resources and to continue my own learning.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that I was also interested in checking out. That sounds like they're doing really great work.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, that's it for our conversation today about this article. And Damien, you are up next time. What do you bring to the table in our next episode?
Yeah, well, get this. I am excited to bring another piece from the newest edition of Hammer and Hope to the table for us. Right. I couldn't let you be the only one to get to bring one of the pieces from the fall 2024 edition. So, and I think you experienced this too. It's always so difficult to figure out what to bring. But the piece that I chose, I think, is going to be a really nice complement to what we read today, which is really kind of cool. So the piece is called The Punishment System and Fascism Go Hand in Hand. And it was written by Rachel Herzing, Amelia Kirby, and Jack Norton. And at this point, I haven't read the piece at all, but I glanced at it and I was struck by the ending of the first paragraph, which I think gave a really good insight into what the piece is all about. So it said, quote, "While studying Project 2025 and other right-wing playbooks, countering vigilante violence, and building anti-fascist power are necessary, we also need to analyze the role the prison industrial complex plays in the existing and emerging threat of fascism." So, yeah, I'm excited about this piece and looking forward to chatting about it next time.
Yeah, this was one of the ones I considered when my other piece from Hammer and Hope. And because all of them look great. And this one looks like some added analysis grounded in abolition of what's to come and how those things, like how the punishment system is going to probably serve the Trump administration. Right. Like, I'm just guessing. Yeah. So I think that it's always good to check this out. I think, understanding how the prison industrial complex exists and how it supports fascism is always helpful to know more about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, good stuff. We'll talk to you all about that next week. But right now, I want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram and TikTok. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.